High above northern Germany, in the icy December sky, a battered B-17 limps through freezing winds, its metal skin torn apart like a wounded giant refusing to fall. Chunks of aluminum flap in the wind, revealing open wounds in the fuselage where cold air slices through the bomber like knives of ice. Inside, blood stains the floor, and the exhausted crew fights to stay conscious as the engines cough smoke with every mile they push forward. Behind them, a solitary German fighter emerges from the haze, sleek, fast, and deadly, closing in with silent precision. The American crew, half frozen and terrified, braces for the end. Every man knows a single burst from that fighter could end their lives in seconds. Yet, no bullets come. The fighter drifts closer, matching their crippled speed, almost curious rather than predatory. Charlie Brown, the young pilot, stares through the shattered cockpit glass. For the first time, he sees the German pilot's eyes looking directly back at him. Hours earlier, everything had been different. The bomber, Ye Old Pub, lifted off from an English airfield with fresh faces and nervous smiles, ready for their first real mission. The target was Bremen, a heavily fortified industrial city, protected by layers of flak guns waiting to tear the bomber formation apart. Charlie and his crew had been assigned the most dangerous slot, the exposed edge of the bomber group, the position every airman secretly feared. As they neared Bremen, black explosions bloomed in the sky like sinister flowers, shaking the formation with thunderous force. Shrapnel ripped through the nose of the aircraft, blowing out the plexiglass and blasting the cockpit with freezing air so cold it burned the skin. More flak struck the wings, severing oxygen lines and sending alarms blaring through the cockpit as Charlie fought to steady the aircraft. 17 tried to hold formation, but with one engine fading and control stiffening, it began to fall behind the other bombers. Slowly, painfully, Ye Old Pub drifted into open sky, alone, exposed, and vulnerable to the German fighters waiting below. On the ground, enemy pilots alerted each other. A lone straggler had appeared. To them, it was a perfect target. Within minutes, 8 fighters launched upward, climbing through thin winter clouds with lethal intent, hungry for a kill. The first attack came from behind. Cannon shells slammed into the B-17's tail section, tearing through armor and killing the tail gunner instantly. Panicked voices filled the intercom as rounds burst through the fuselage, wounding the waist gunners and jamming the ball turret in place. The bomber dropped so low that the crew could see rooftops and roads beneath them, flying at an altitude no heavy bomber should ever attempt. German fighters circled like predators, sensing a wounded animal, firing burst after burst into the bomber's exposed frame. Charlie Brown struggled with the controls, feeling the aircraft shake violently as another cannon round slammed into the right wing. Inside, crew members fought through fear and freezing air, shouting over the intercom while trying to return fire with their damaged guns. For nearly 20 unbearable minutes, the fighters made repeated attack runs, each one carving new wounds into the dying aircraft. Miraculously, the attack slowed. Whether out of ammunition or disbelief that the B-17 still flew, the fighters eventually broke away. The silence left behind was terrifying. The crew knew it meant only one thing. They were alone, deep in enemy territory. Charlie glanced around the cockpit. Frost covered the instruments, and the wind roared through the shattered nose like a storm. In the waist section, blood mixed with ice as surviving gunners tried to keep each other awake, shaking their freezing hands. Despite the chaos, one decision united all 10 men. They would head west, toward England, no matter the cost. But down below, on a German airfield, another danger was preparing to enter the sky. Luftwaffe ace Franz Stigler had just landed after downing 2 bombers. His plane still smelled of engine oil and burnt cordite. When a mechanic pointed upward at the limping B-17, Stigler instantly recognized an easy kill drifting right across his airspace. He climbed back into his Messerschmitt, fueled by instinct and the drive for survival that defined every fighter pilot. With a roar of the engine, his Bf-109 raced down the runway, lifting into the cold winter sky in pursuit of the crippled bomber. As he climbed above the treetops, Stigler scanned the horizon until he spotted the barely moving silhouette of Ye Old Pub. From a distance, it looked like any other wounded bomber, slow, exposed, and moments away from becoming another tally on his victory list. He closed the distance quickly, positioning himself directly behind the B-17, lining up his guns for the final, effortless shot. But as he flew closer, the true condition of the American bomber came into view, and disbelief washed over him. The entire tail section was shredded open. No gunner moved. No turret tracked him. It was as if the plane had been opened like a tin can. Through the torn metal, Stigler could see American airmen kneeling over their wounded, not fighting, just trying to keep each other alive. Stigler eased off the throttle, letting the Bf-109 drift closer until he could almost reach out and touch the bomber's tail. As he slid alongside the fuselage, his eyes locked onto the faces inside, pale, exhausted, terrified, and barely conscious. He saw one crewman slumped over his machine gun, unmoving. Another tried to wrap a bandage with trembling, frozen hands. It didn't look like a combat crew anymore. It looked like a small group of young men struggling simply to stay alive. In that instant, Stigler felt something deeper than orders or medals. He felt the unmistakable pull of human compassion. His finger hovered over the trigger, but something inside him refused to fire. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't a victory. Instead, he remembered the words of his commanding officer, Gustave Rodel. Honor is what separates a soldier from a murderer. Stigler moved his fighter closer to the cockpit, positioning himself where Charlie Brown could clearly see him. Charlie's breath caught. A German ace was just meters away, staring straight at him through the broken glass. But the German pilot did not raise his guns. He did not attack. Instead, he motioned with his hand, signaling downward. Stigler pointed repeatedly toward the south, urging the Americans to divert and land in neutral Sweden before the bomber fell apart. Inside the B-17, the crew misread the signals. They thought the German wanted them to surrender or prepare for a final attack. Charlie shook his head, gripping the controls harder. He had only one goal left: get his men home, no matter the risk. Seeing the Americans refuse, Stigler realized they were either too determined or too injured to change course. For the first time that day, he admired their courage. Their plane was dying, yet they refused to give up. So he made a decision no German pilot was ever expected to make. If they insisted on flying toward England, he would protect them. Stigler repositioned his Bf-109, sliding into a tight escort formation beside the crippled bomber, shielding it from the ground gunners below. To anti-aircraft crews on the ground, it looked like a German fighter escorting a German bomber, not an enemy aircraft limping home. The ruse worked. Not a single flak gun opened fire. The skies that had tried to kill them now fell strangely silent. Inside Ye Olde Pub, the crew watched the German ace with disbelief. The man they feared most had become their unexpected guardian. With the German fighter guarding their flank, the crew of Ye Olde Pub felt a strange mix of fear and safety. An enemy was now their shield. The bomber crawled forward at barely half its normal speed, wobbling with every gust of winter wind, metal creaking under the strain. Stigler matched their pace perfectly, flying slower than a fighter was ever meant to fly, just to stay beside them. Charlie kept glancing at the Messerschmitt, still unable to believe the German pilot wasn't attacking but protecting them. Every mile they crossed was a miracle. Every second felt like borrowed time, held together by the mercy of a single man in a rival uniform. Below them, small German towns passed by, unaware that an act of compassion was taking place right above their rooftops. Whenever the bomber drifted, Stigler moved closer, nudging the formation as if guiding a limping friend through the sky. Inside the waist section, a wounded gunner whispered, "Why isn't he firing?" No one had an answer that made sense. The bomber's engines coughed smoke again, threatening to stall. Stigler tightened his formation, almost flying wingtip to wingtip. Charlie steadied the controls, knowing one more failure could send the bomber into the sea long before reaching England. Gradually, the snow-covered German countryside faded, replaced by the dark stretch of the North Sea below. This was the point of no return. If the bomber went down here, the freezing water would claim them long before rescue could arrive. Stigler looked across one last time, reading the exhaustion and determination in Charlie's eyes through the broken cockpit glass. He knew he could escort them no farther. If he crossed this line, he would be branded a traitor, risking execution. The German ace edged closer to the bomber, flying so near that the crew could see frost forming on his flight mask. Then he raised his hand in a firm, deliberate salute, an unforgettable gesture of respect from one pilot to another. Charlie slowly raised his hand back. No words were spoken, yet both men understood the weight of that silent farewell. With one final look, Stigler banked his Messerschmitt away, disappearing into the cold gray clouds he had emerged from. For the first time in miles, Ye Old Pub was alone again, but not in fear. The German ace had given them hope. Charlie turned the bomber toward England, pushing the engines to their limit, carrying with him the memory of the most unlikely guardian. The North Sea stretched endlessly below as the bomber limped forward, fighting cold air and fading engines with every shaking mile. Inside, the crew checked on each other, wounded men, reassuring wounded men, holding on to hope as tightly as they held on to life. The second engine sputtered violently, threatening to die, but Charlie coaxed it gently, whispering to the trembling controls like a prayer. Then, through the icy horizon, the coastline of England finally appeared, white, distant, and more beautiful than any of them had ever seen. Charlie guided the failing bomber lower, aligning with the nearest airfield, unsure if the landing gear would even hold. The B-17 touched down hard, skidding across the runway, metal screaming as the wounded aircraft fought against its own momentum. When the aircraft finally stopped, ground crews rushed forward, then froze, stunned by the impossible damage it had survived. They stared at holes large enough to crawl through, at shredded metal, at missing guns, and at the lifeless tail section ripped open by cannon fire. But their greatest shock came when the crew reported that a German fighter had escorted them all the way to the sea and then let them go. Officers quietly filed the report away. Some didn't believe it. Others thought it best not to spread a story that complicated wartime hatred. The war ended, but Charlie carried the memory like a silent weight, wondering if the German pilot had lived or died for sparing them. Years passed. Charlie built a new life, raised a family, and tried to forget the haunting image of that German pilot saluting him. But every December, the memory returned, sharp as ever, and he wondered what drove that man to mercy in a world built on violence. In 1986, at a reunion of bomber crews, Charlie finally shared the story aloud. Veterans listened in stunned silence. Encouraged, Charlie began searching for the unknown German writing letters across Europe, hoping for even a single clue. For months, replies came back empty. No name, no record, no one who fit the story of the fighter who refused to kill. Then, a Luftwaffe Veterans Association published his account in a newsletter, one final attempt to find the man who saved him. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Canada containing just 4 words that made Charlie's hands tremble. I was the one. Franz Stigler had survived the war. He had moved continents. And he too had been searching for the bomber he spared that winter day. When the two finally reunited, they embraced like brothers, one who lived because of mercy, and one whose compassion echoed across history. Don't forget to hit subscribe to discover more untold stories of World War II.